This lecture is on conceptual art. Here is a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. I love Calvin and Hobbes, it's from my youth. And I also love that Calvin often was talking about art. So that was something for me that was really exciting when I was younger to see a cartoon that dealt with art. And in this piece, you'll notice Calvin has made a snow sculpture, right? And Hobbes is like, where is it? And he's basically talking about, it's everything because art is dead and there's nothing to stay. And, style is exhausted, content is pointless, blah, blah, blah. He's like, but I'm going to sign it and you can pay me $1 million. And Hobbes says, well, sorry, it doesn't match my furniture. And he says, the problem with being avant garde is knowing who's putting on who. Conceptual art gets into the question of what is art, It goes back to the framework of course, Duchamp and Dada. As I'd mentioned with Duchamp, he really is the father of conceptual art, the father of this sense that, art doesn't have to be about construction or making, it can be about idea, right? It can be about the ideas that govern the pieces. And so I always say conceptualism is about idea versus object. The idea is what conceptualists are really interested in. They're not very interested in whether you actually complete it. So here I gave you an example of, a conceptual art piece. It's directing you to do something, but you don't have to, right? My dissertation, my doctoral dissertation actually was on conceptualism. So this is something I've spent a lot of time with. And I remember going to meet with a conceptual art collector, and they wanted to show me their art collection as I was doing my research. And when they got their collection out, it was literally like a box with a bunch of handwritten notes like this. Because again, the conceptualist said the idea is what it's about, not the making of the thing. So I always laughed a lot about, someone would say, what are you doing your, doctoral work on? I was like, well, nothing, ideas, not really objects. But for me, as sort of someone who likes theoretical art, and I have a passion for that, why do people do things? It's a good fit for me. But conceptualism can be confusing to others. So I always say you have to always keep reminding yourself idea versus object. Now, if you do the thing, it becomes a performance. And later we're going to talk about performance art. So I always say, hold on and think about how conceptualism and performance are kind of cousins to each other, can feed off each other, but aren't the same thing, right? And sometimes in class, I do a project where I have them come up with a conceptual art piece, and then later I show them how those things could function as performance. So this is actually something that one of my students wrote down, do a kung fu kick. And if I had done it in class, then I would have been a performance artist, right? But their idea is a conceptual art piece. So hopefully that illustrates a bit of how to approach this idea of ideas, right? I laugh at this one. This is a good conceptual art piece. I will not make any more boring art, right? So notice a lot of these things are handwritten directives in a sense. And as I was studying conceptualism while doing my doctorate, I really separated out conceptualism in my mind into two different branches. So this is my theoretics right on this. This is something that is part of my research. The two branches to me are the cerebral branch, the conceptualism that is more functioning as how to examine ideas, how to examine language, how to examine semiotics, right? How do we label things the way that we label things? And so I say the cerebral branch is more of a drier kind of conceptualism. For instance, we'll look at one and three chairs that you're seeing here, and talk a little bit about conceptualism right through that lens. The other side that I think is a little more interesting within conceptualism is what I call political or institutional critique. Conceptualism that looks at politics, right, or looks at the fundamentals of how like a society functions. And then I love conceptualism that deals with like institutional critique. And when I say institutions, I mean like museums and galleries. So that kind of conceptualism gets into, how does a museum work, and then how do you challenge that, right, with the use of conceptual artworks. So I think that's pretty interesting, the institutional critique, when we get there. So again, two different branches to me and two different ways of sort of approaching this. And again, I think you have to think about both camps and how they work. The first camp, of course, will be cerebral, and we'll get to that in our next lecture.